Today, I am meeting with the Frazier family. Thank you so much for having me in your home. Appreciate the time that you're allowing me to spend with you. So, just real quick, I'd love for you to introduce yourselves. Maybe we can start with the youngest one.
My name is Sydney.
How old are you?
I'm 9 years old.
So you are in 4th grade? Okay. What kind of things do you like to do?
I like to draw.
Nice. Very good. Okay, and then who's next? Mom or Dad?
I'll go next. I'm Chris. I enjoy reading and spending time with my family and hanging out outside whenever I can when the weather's not gross.
And I'm Seth. What else did you want to know about me?
Just what do you like to do for fun?
Okay. I'm getting into the woodworking as a hobby. I enjoy light yard work that is productive.
Okay.
But
emphasis on light yard work.
Light yard work, and I do enjoy a little bit of gardening here and there. So
that's good to know. I'll have to call you next spring when it's time to plant something.
She's a better green thumb than I am.
Is that right?
Depends on what we're planting.
Okay. So, Sydney, you are 9 years old, and you are the big sister, aren't you? So tell me about your little sister.
Her name is Emily, and she was 2 months old when she passed away.
Was that hard for you?
Yes.
What did you think about the day she was born?
I was excited to have a little sister.
Yeah. Did you know before she was born that she might have some difficulties?
Not really.
Really? So you don't remember discussing that with your parents? That was a shrug. You can't hear it, but okay, that's interesting. But tell me about the day that she was born. What were you doing?
I was drawing her pictures, I think.
And how did you find out that she had been born?
I got to hold her.
Were you at school or were you home?
Oh.
You don't remember?
No.
Okay, so it's been a little while. How old were you when Emily was born?
4.
4 years old. So that's 5 years ago now. So your memories of her are going to be just little snippets. What's one of your favorite memories that you can remember?
Maybe when I first met her.
Yeah. What was that like?
I got to snuggle her and hug her.
Oh, that's very sweet. And you're excited to have a little sister. Do you remember knowing that she had some difficulties and that she may not survive very long?
Yes.
What do you remember about that?
I remember that she was struggling to breathe sometimes.
Oh, was that scary? I bet. Was your mom there when that happened, or your dad?
Yeah.
So what did your mom or dad do during that time to help you not to be scared?
They helped me to, I don't know.
It's okay. It's okay if you don't know, if you can't remember. It was a long time ago. But you just remember that there were some scary times. So now that it's been a little while since you've been with Emily, do you miss her? Do you think about her very much?
Yeah.
What do you think about?
I think about the things I could be doing with her.
Really? What would you like to do with her if you could?
A lot of things.
Like drawing? Things that you like? Have you had any experiences where you felt peaceful?
Mm-hmm.
We were talking for a minute without the camera on about how most of the kids you know haven't had that experience. And they might not have an experience like that for quite some time. So you know some things and you understand some things that a lot of kids your age have not experienced yet. So that's kind of hard. What do you think about that, Mom?
I think that's a whole nother level of my grief that I was not prepared for, was helping her with hers and just like watching my kid grieve, you know, realizing like it's not just me that's grieving and it's not just Seth that's grieving, but she's grieving too. And it's like a whole other level of a different layer, you know, like I'm not only grieving the child that I lost, but I'm grieving the relationship that my child that's still living lost too, you know.
Right.
And so watching her struggle through her grief and feel all of her feelings was like this added component to my own grief, you know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why we were so adamant to get her into a counselor as soon as we could. Just given my experience and talking to my older sister about the things that she went through when she was about the same age. And it was very evident that she had big feelings that she was never able to work out. And so having that ability to have Sydney meet with somebody and to kind of relay, because Sydney wasn't vocalizing to us how she was feeling. Like we would see in her drawings, when your 4-year-old's drawing dead people and dead babies on a page, gets you in the heart and you're like, okay, there's something going on here. We got to get you to see somebody. So that's what we were like, okay, well, Chris has already seen a counselor and she had a room to take in Sydney. So we were able to do that, and she was able to do some basic EMDR with Sydney to help her kind of go through some of the emotions. And I don't know if Sydney's gone back in a while, but it would be, I almost wonder if sometimes it would be good to have her go back after 2 years of normalcy.
Well, and I check in with her occasionally too and say, do you feel like you need to talk to Miss Kylie? You know, if you ever feel like you need to, you can let me know and I'm happy to make an appointment. And, you know, so we still have the conversation and, you know, keep it open. We've really tried to normalize, like, it's okay to talk to someone, you know, like, because I think a lot of times people feel like because the family suffered it, the family should be the ones to, like, work through it, you know? And it's just sometimes easier to talk to somebody who's not in the middle of it and has all the big feelings and has all the connection, you know? You have this outside objective party that can just listen and offer perspective and validation and all of the things that you need, because they're not also feeling all the big feelings you're feeling, you know? Like, there's a place for each, I think, I guess is what I'm saying. And so we were grateful to be able to have that outside perspective.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's my older 2 kids lost their mom when they were quite young. And I observed that when they had developmental milestones, that different aspects of that grief seemed to come out. Mm-hmm. But it would be interesting to talk to a counselor and see if that's just anecdotal in my experience or if there's something to that.
Yeah, I don't know. I just knew the importance of getting to the end was pretty high.
So you mentioned your sister. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when, because Emily had trisomy 18, genetic but not hereditary, when we were finding out some stuff from the doctors, as soon as we found out that Emily did have trisomy 18, that was the same genetic issue that took one of my sisters.
Oh, wow.
And so, again, I'm adopted.
But it's not genetic.
Right, and I'm adopted. So that so it's not like, I'm biologically related to that family, so there's no link there. I used to think the staff at the maternal fetal medicine, they're like, wait, you got a sister? This is big. And I'm like, I'm adopted. They're like, oh, darn.
They thought there was some kind of scientific breakthrough.
Right. Happening in this room right here.
No. How unusual.
Yeah. So, do we feel like that was by coincidence? Probably not. We don't feel like that's the case. So I don't remember any of this. So she would be, Jerusha is her name.
She's actually 2 weeks older than me.
Yeah.
1985.
Yeah. And so
August 2nd, 1995.
Yeah, my older sister is 5 years older than me. So I don't remember anything. But so my parents were living in, what's the name of that? Pendleton, Oregon. And basically they had to drive to Dornbecker, which is in Portland.
That's a long drive.
Yeah, until they got, I don't know if they flew or they drove, one of the two. I don't remember the exact details, but so they ended up going there, and, you know, I think she only lived for 8 hours total, and we had one picture of her that one of the nurses was able to take. But, I mean, she was born with a lot of her organs outside of the body. The much more severe case of trisomy 18. But I still remember my older sister, when we were talking about it before Emily was born, that she was in the back of the car next to this little casket.
Oh, wow. That's quite a memory.
And so she's 5 or 6 years old at that point, and I'm sitting there going, and my older sister does suffer from depression. She's got quite a few mental and physical health issues that has caused her to, and I don't, not that I question, but in 1985, you know, mental health was not a thing. And so, like, my mom just, you know, she swallowed the grief and carry on. And so that was, I think they were expecting my older sister to swallow the grief and carry on. And I think those memories have definitely been there. And with Emily, when she was born, and none of my family except for my parents got to meet Emily.
Oh, wow.
And
So that's another loss for your sister.
Yeah. And I don't think she got to meet Jerusha either. I think she was still in Pendleton. Or she was with grandma and grandpa in Portland. I don't remember the whole details. So she never got that either. And so there's just this, I think, seeing her and her grief, I was like, okay, and she's, I think how old she was, like 40 at the time that Emily was born. So it's like, there's a lot of unresolved things that I view that we could prevent down the road with having more mental health for Sydney. And so, you know, so my older sister is great. It's just, I could tell that this definitely affected her. I mean, Emily affected her, and it was just like a flashback for her with Jerusha.
Right, like it just happened yesterday.
Yeah.
Like she's 5 years old again.
Yeah.
Sitting in the back seat next to a casket.
Yeah.
That's quite a memory. So how did you help her prepare for school after this experience?
So everything happened in March, and she was going to start.
She was in
well,
preschool.
March and May. Yeah, she was in preschool at the time, and so her preschool teacher had lost a child, like 19 years ago, I think. And so she, as soon as we were super vocal about everything. Like, once we found out Emily's diagnosis, we were like, okay, we have to tell everybody, because I cannot show up at church every Sunday and have people see my growing belly and ask how I'm feeling, or how much longer I have, or when I'm due, or do I know what I'm having yet, or all the questions that you can ask a pregnant person.
Normal questions.
Normal pregnant person questions. I can't field those questions knowing what I know. I cannot do that every single Sunday. Like, that was not good for my mental health. And so we decided we were just going to send a letter to the ward, and it got sent. Well, we sent it to, I think we sent it to Bishop, and then either way, it got distributed to the whole ward, and we just said, here's what we know about our pregnancy. Here's what we need from you. And it listed out, like, if you see us in the hall, don't be afraid to say hi. If you don't know what to say something. Something is better than just completely avoiding us, because that hurts worse, right? Like, just say, I love you, I'm here for you, whatever. Just don't avoid us. And so having all of that out there in the open was super helpful. And so anyway, all that to say, her preschool teacher then, of course, knew about it. And we said, hey, this is happening, whatever. And so then she said, well, we've had a loss too. I would love to connect with you if you just need to chat or commiserate or whatever. I get it. I know what it's like, So anyway, they actually, she had kind of two teachers at the time. And so they made I don't know what you would call it, I guess a therapy box.
Okay.
I don't know, just like a box that had a whole bunch of different stuff in it that Sydney could do whenever she was feeling her big feelings, right? Okay. And so there was like a coloring book with like specific coloring pages that were maybe sort of related to like the experience that she might be going through. There was a little like flip book of like activities to do when you're feeling big feelings. And so one of them was like, get on the couch and go upside down, or like stand and look like down between your legs behind you, and just like, you know, like changing your perspective and like moving your body in different ways that like helps you kind of get outside of what you're feeling, you know. And so just different little fun activity things like that she could just kind of like go to when she was feeling her feels, you know.
That's fantastic.
So that was super sweet as preschool. And so then Emily passed away in May. And so Sydney's going into kindergarten that fall. And we were like, okay, this is a big deal. Like, she's still super triggered by ambulances and fire trucks. Mm-hmm. And so anytime she would hear an ambulance or a fire truck, she would like either start crying, or she would like grab onto my arm and like have a death grip until the sound stopped, you know, like just very big trigger for her. And, you know, they have that from time to time at school, or like if they have a fire alarm or something, you know, like that's a loud, unexpected, you know, we weren't sure how she was going to react to that. And then, you know, all the things that happen usually when you're meeting a new classmate, right? Like, oh, how many siblings do you have? Tell me about your family,
How do
you know, like all of these things. And I'm like, she's got to have some adults in her life that know what's going on, so that when this comes up, you know.
Yes.
And so we decided to meet with her teacher, the school counselor, our personal counselor, and the principal of the school. We had this big meeting with all of us.
And you initiated all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, we got to do something, because I can't send my poor, wounded kindergartner off to school all alone in this world of hurt and pain. Right. And not have some support, you know?
And I think you reached out to the principal first. Then when we got the name of the teacher, we were able to meet with the teacher. But then it was their idea to really bring everybody together and like, you know, and so they were super supportive. The school was super supportive. Like the first fire drill that they did, she pulled the fire alarm. Oh. She's the one that did the test, because the principal took her out of class and made sure that, you know, she would understand the process of what was going on. And so, you know, it was just very good. And so she's had that support through us. And like every school year, you know, we inform the teachers either by an email or in person. The last couple of years has been over email, but, you know, and the teachers get it, they understand it. And, you know, you kind of have to be, while you want your child to succeed and grow and learn on their own, you kind of have to advocate for them for a little bit at the beginning, just so that, you know, hey, she's experienced something that maybe her peers in her class have never experienced yet. And so watch out. And, you know, and her kindergarten teacher was great, talked to us a lot. She's like, hey, you know, I overheard a couple of the kids talking, and, you know, they're talking about, you know, siblings, and Sydney, matter of factly, would tell them, oh yeah, well, you know, Emily's not with us or whatever. And being a kindergartner, would be like, okay, whatever, and they'd move on. And
so it normalized it for all of the children.
Yeah. So like the rest of the kids really didn't have, you know, and, you know, her kindergarten teacher would have stepped in if appropriate, but at the same time allow Sydney to express what she had gone through. So I think it's been helpful. Wouldn't you say, Sydney? She's nodding her head, yes.
Yeah.
So,
well, I ask her at the beginning of every year. I told her one time, I said, Sydney, do you still want me to tell your teacher about Emily? And she's like, yeah. And I said, okay, well, if there ever comes a year where you feel like you can do it on your own and you want to do it on your own, that's fine. You can let me know. But I'm also happy to do it for you. If that's what I need to do to support you in your grief, I'm happy to take that piece. Because I remember for me, I felt like sometimes it was easier to have someone that already knew about the situation inform someone else on my behalf. Yeah. Instead of having to retell it for the 100th time, you know?
Yes.
And so I felt like if this is the thing that I can do to ease your burden just a little, I'm happy to do that. And so usually in the email, I'll tell the teacher, hey, this is what happened. This is when it happened. This is how Sydney reacted to it. And this is how she is now. These are some of the things that she might need. This is what to watch out for. This is how you can support her. If you have questions, please come to me. I'm happy to talk about it. She's usually open to talk about it, but just so you know what's going on, and you know, if she writes about Emily in one of her papers, or she gets up in class at some time when they have to like introduce themselves or whatever, and she talks about her dead sister, like, you'll know this.
Right.
So that it's not just like, you know, deer in the headlights, slap you upside the head, you know. But also having the adults that she's with most of her day be aware of it already makes her feel more comfortable to actually have a conversation about it. And it makes her feel safe to talk about it if she wants to talk about it, you know, because she knows that the other adult, she knows that the adult in the room is already aware. And so it's safer to talk about it than to just be like, okay, I don't know if anybody knows about this, but I'm just going to go for it. You know, it makes her feel more comfortable.
It's remarkable to me, the way you have all navigated this process. And I particularly wanted to talk to you because I remember when you were pregnant and found out about Emily's condition, and you were very straightforward in a way that really did, it opened up a conversation on your terms, right? But it invited people in to support you and to love you in the way that you needed, that we would not have known had you not shared, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, the ward, amazing. You know, I think it was that Green Acres ward?
No, it was Salties at the time.
What was it?
It was Salties.
Salties ward, yeah. But, I mean, we had several members that just showed up at our house with easily $200 worth of Costco items. And she'd be like, okay, well, these are all easy to make. You know, this only takes 2 minutes to do. This pop this in the oven only takes like 4 minutes to do this, or whatever. And
she even had like pairings, you know, like if you have this side dish with this thing and this thing, you know, like it was almost like a meal plan.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
It got us through, I mean, a good chunk. You know, the ward, like, we didn't set up for Emily coming home. No crib, no packing plan, nothing.
We weren't sure what to expect. I mean, we took her urn with us to the hospital. You know, like we figured we were not coming home with a baby. You know, like if she survived, she was going to die in the hospital, and that was that. You know, like it never crossed our minds just because of the statistics and the prognosis and everything. You know, it just didn't even occur to us that we were going to be bringing a baby home, and especially not 2 days after she was born. And so we had nothing. I mean, we had a crib, but we didn't have it set up. Right. We didn't have, you know, like we didn't have any of our stuff out. We had all the baby things. We just didn't get any of it out because it was too hard for us. You know, we didn't want to have to come home to this space that was not going to get used.
Right.
And so it was just easier to just not do it. Yeah. And so when we set out the word that she had been born alive and was doing fine and she was going to be coming home, within, like 3 hours?
Something like that.
We had clothes to bring her home from the hospital in, like a whole wardrobe brought to the hospital.
Wow.
And space in our house was made. Sisters came over, cleaned out a space, and made a nursery, got all of our stuff, and we had a space to come home to. And we didn't have to stress or worry or anything. It just happened.
And the joke is we're still finding things that they just threw in a closet.
Yeah. They just put random stuff different places because they weren't sure, but they needed to do it, you know, and so they just did it.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you mentioned your ward, which is an LDS term for a church congregation.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So for somebody who may not be familiar with that term, it would be like a parish or a church, your regular church group.
Yeah.
What difference did that make that you had as the support network from church already in place?
So I work with a gal who, and I'm probably the only active member at work. I think there's one other right now, but at the time I was the only member of our faith there. But there was a gal there that was pretty strong in her Christian beliefs, and she lost a child. And I told her, like, I don't know how people that don't have a religious background can go through something like this. And she agreed with me because she was like, yeah, totally. Like, different belief structures, different thoughts about things. But at the end of the day, if you don't have that background, I don't know how you can process death, and especially the death of a child.
Right. And that is the whole point of what good grieving is. Grieving well is impossible to do alone.
Yeah.
It has to be done in community.
Yeah, I totally believe that. You know, you said earlier that you were impressed by how we were able to say what we needed, right? And I really think that because we were so open with everything, that you're right, like people knew how to help because we said something. And I think so many times people, when they have an experience like this, they just want to keep it close to the vest because it's super vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's really vulnerable.
It's very private. It's very painful.
Yeah. But it was seriously the single best decision that we made throughout everything that we went through, to be as public about it as we were, because it was so much easier. Like, yeah, it was hard. Don't get me wrong. But it was easier because we had so many people to support us. And I don't think that that's necessarily only because of the church. I mean, yes, sure. Members of the church are generally known for being a little bit more loving and kind and supportive, you know, but I really think that any kind of religious community, or, I mean, I guess you could make the jump that any community that is, you know, tight-knit enough could provide the necessary support for something like this. But it all starts with you making the decision to say what's going on and say something, because people can't help if they don't know, you know?
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off of that, it's not, you know, you can have that religious community if you got a lot of family in the area and they're very supportive of what you're doing. That works too. I mean, for us, we had nobody up here. Like, our family was very much going to be our friends at church, because that's what we had. That's what the support system that we had. And while my parents were here and her mom was up here at the time of Emily's birth, like, my parents actually left, I think, after about a week and a half, because they're like, there's nothing we can do here.
Everyone's taking care of you. What do you need us for?
And so then after, so my whole family came in for the memorial, and then they left almost as fast as they came in. And so our friends being up here, they were really great. Like, they got stuff set up for us. They took things down. Then they would disappear when my family was here, our family was here, and then they would show right back up as soon as everyone was gone.
Wow.
So it was just like, oh, okay. So, wow. It's so never felt like we were completely suspended. Like, you get that feeling when you're in the grief process of, you know, am I doing this alone? Kind of like that. You're suspended in the midair, and you don't have any of that grounding to keep you tolerated. So, and I only had one time where I felt like that, and we can talk about that down a little further if you want, but yeah.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So the night that she passed away, when we found out that she wasn't doing good, she was going to be in, like, the doctor, the palliative care doctor at Sacred Heart Hospital, Children's Hospital, called Chris and was like, I don't think she's going to make it. She's really struggling. And so Chris called me, and they picked me up, and then we went over to the hospital. And then our friend Dari and the hospice nurse, they both showed up too. And so, like, Dari was great. She coordinated getting Sydney to a friend's house. And so we basically, waited for the time to come when she would pass away. And like Dari took Chris home. It was like, no, I'm taking you home. I think she left her car at the hospital.
Wow.
Just so that she could get Chris home. And so they dropped me off.
To pick up his car from work.
I'm not leaving my car at work. So I took it home because I was like, okay, this is muscle memory from here on out. I'll just get on the road and get going home. And I'll know how to get home without, but I still remember I pulled into the driveway and they weren't home yet because they were picking up Sydney. And I remember, and it's like 9 o'clock at night.
It had to have been later than that.
Maybe it was 11. I don't know. I just remember I pulled into the driveway and I got out of my car and I just looked down the street. And there was this like I wanted to bang on everyone's door and say, do you know what happened tonight? So it was just that momentary time when you felt alone. But it was just a little glimpse. But it was just like, man, do you know what happened? Do you know what happened tonight? And I'm sure they did because we were very public about it. We put it on our Facebook group. And so our friends knew what had happened. But it was almost like I needed that welcoming committee, but they wasn't there.
Right.
And so it's just like, man. So I think by the time they got home, it was just a long day. We all got to bed. I still remember I emailed my work and I'm just like, nope. I did a half day today. I'm starting my bereavement leave starting tomorrow. And so, they got back to me and was like, yep, totally get it. See you in a week. And so then for us, everything after that was just like, okay, we already had, like we said, we weren't going to bring her home. So we already had a memorial service in our head written down.
I planned her entire memorial before she was born.
So all we had to do was just call it like 2 or 3
Press
people
go.
And it was done. And we had it, and we were off to the races. But it was just that knowing, like, people knew, but there wasn't anybody there.
Right.
That was like that one time I was just like, but like on the way home, totally fine. But you just got out of the car and you're looking around the street and you're like, does anyone know?
Yeah. Here's all these people living their blissfully ignorant lives, just going about their life while mine has just completely crashed,
Right.
I remember having that same feeling. I don't remember if it could have been on the way out of the hospital or it may have been the next day at the grocery store or something. I don't remember, but I remember having that same feeling where I just wanted to walk up to every person I saw and just grab them by the shoulders and be like, do you have any idea what just happened? Like, you have to know this. I just wanted to tell everyone and make them understand the gravity of the situation, and recognize while they're living their life, this stuff happens,
Yeah. I think that happens a lot in the grocery store. That was my grocery store moment too, pushing my cart around thinking, this is so weird. This is so weird and ridiculous.
Yeah, you're just in this whole other world.
Yeah. Yeah, and everybody's just picking out bananas, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's also taught, at least for me, that's taught that you don't know what that individual is going through. And on the outside, they look completely fine. But on the inside, who knows?
They could have had the worst day, but...
maybe they did lose their mom, their dad, their grandma. Maybe they are going through a nasty divorce and there's a lot of pain and grief going on there. And so it's made me try to be a little more empathetic towards people, especially if they do something and you're just like, was that something you normally do? Or was that something that you did that because you're not in the state of mind that you normally would be in?
Right. Well, these are really good. Do you still experience triggers?
Oh, yeah.
Are they predictable or are they unpredictable?
for me, unpredictable.
Usually I can pretty predict mine, but go ahead.
Go ahead.
I call them sneaker waves, the ones that are unpredictable. So you think of grief like the ocean, right? It kind of ebbs and flows, right? And you can, as you're watching the ocean, you can see a wave and you're like, oh, that's gonna be a big one, right? Like sometimes grief is that way. You can be like, okay, I know that it's gonna be around the birth or her we call it her butterfly day, the day that she passed away. People call it angel day or heaven day or whatever, but we call it butterfly day because that's how we remember her. So like those are obvious, right? Like those are going to happen. You can see them coming. Holidays, sometimes Christmas is tough depending on the situation. So you can see those, right? But then there's those ones that just come up and grab you out of nowhere. Like when you're walking on the beach and then like there's that wave that comes and you're like, oh, and you get wet up to your waist when you were only counting on getting wet up to your knees or whatever, I call those sneaker waves. They just come out of nowhere and they're totally unexpected. And you're like, wow, okay, so we're feeling this now, and they just catch you totally by surprise. So yeah, totally. Still,
how do you manage
even
those?
Still.
What do you do?
I think for me, the biggest thing is just acknowledging it and kind of sitting in it, which is super hard because especially depending on what I'm doing with my life at the moment, like, let's say I'm out with Henry or whatever, like, toddlers aren't exactly understanding of your need to just have a moment, But usually I try hard to just kind of lean in and like acknowledge like, okay, I'm feeling this. Sometimes I question why I'm feeling it. Sometimes I just feel it. Sometimes that looks like eating my feelings, which is probably not the best, but you know what? It works in the moment. I'm a huge writer when it comes to like processing my feelings. And so sometimes I'll journal and just word vomit all over the page just to get it out of my head and somewhere into the ether. Sometimes if I'm not able to do that and I just need to like stream of consciousness, speak it out, I can put like a note on my phone, or I'll do like the recording option on my phone and just just get it out. Sometimes I call a friend. Sometimes I talk to him depending on what he's doing in his moment, Sometimes he's either at work or he's not in a spot where he can hear me out, But just process it, figure it out. And if it's really bad, then I call my counselor.
So it depends on how big the sneaker wave is.
Exactly. So,
yeah. How about you, Seth?
And that I think is funny because I view our level of where we are in the grieving process to be quite a bit different. I mean, I'm starting to see a counselor. I've only been there doing that for about, maybe
3 months?
6 months?
4
3
months?
months? Maybe 4 months. So, I mean, I haven't been seeing somebody for any length of time.
And her passing was in which year?
2019.
2019.
And I started seeing a counselor before Emily was born because I knew I was going to need to see somebody afterwards, and it was easier to have that already established than to try and be like, okay, so all of this happened, right? It's easier for me, I felt, to establish kind of that relationship before she was born. And I obviously had stuff to process then too, the not knowing what was going to happen and, that kind of stuff. And so, I started seeing my counselor before she was even born. Whereas, like he said, he just barely started.
I would say that those triggering moments, and I mean, let's face it, I'm a male, and there's that perception that, that men have, that people have of men when they're grieving, and you don't see it. Like, people don't see that. And so I think for a lot of us guys is that we may get that wave that hits, but we don't do anything with it until 12, 1 o'clock at night when you're by yourself and pretty bleak, right? That's, the darkest time is right before the sun rises, and sometimes that's when we men process our feelings away from family, away from people, and maybe it's a a genetic thing that has been disposed in men for centuries. That just now is starting to get broken down, and now the stigma of seeing a counselor is not so great, especially if you're a guy. So there's that. And so for me, I mean, I can see the triggers, but then sometimes it's like, okay, that was random. Like, I didn't think that was going to be the issue here, really. And so then it's using the tools that you learn, process it. For me, I'll sit there, I stew, I think about it, I let it just do what it needs to do. Maybe I listen to a couple of songs that encapsulate what I'm feeling, and then I start to feel better, and then I'll usually go about my day after I felt like it's been processed. And so a lot of times for me, that grieve is pretty non-existent to the rest of the family. Like, they just don't see it. And again, I think it's a male thing that society has slowly taken a step back and say, well, we need to hear you too. And so I think there's a lot of that for me. It's just like, okay, well, I'm just going to work through my process right now. And so, like, the last, what was it, Angel Day or Butterfly Day that so typically my boss and work, they very much believe in mental health days. And so I'll take that day as a mental health day. Come on, let's face it, I'm not going to get a whole lot of stuff done that day. Right. So I will purposely be out of the office. It's a mental health day. And I still remember, so my boss, who's now not with the company anymore, she, like 2 weeks before, was like, hey, I know you're going through this time, and I get, so you're taking that time off, and so she was, I was like, oh yeah, you beat me to it, but yeah, I'm going to take that day off. And so it actually affected me more than I thought it was going to. And so fortunately, I had a counseling appointment the next day. So I was able to just go, and we were able to process that and talk about it. So I think the problem for me is that a lot of times I don't have time to deal with it. So like when something does trigger, I acknowledge that, oh, I felt that, but I can't feel more than that because I gotta go into this next meeting, or I gotta go do this, or there's something else that needs to happen. And so usually by about 10, 11 o'clock, that's when I get to feel the process. That's when I can do it. My responsibilities for the family have been taken care of.
Right, and yes, but unfortunately, at that time, Chris is asleep.
Yep.
The house is quiet. So you are grieving alone.
Yep.
Which is the opposite of what you had said had been so helpful when you were sharing that grief with your community.
And that's the weird part of it, right? Is that I can still grieve and have everyone grieve around me, but not the true grieving, but the more deeper grief, I think, at least for me as a guy, is those other times when I'm by myself. And so there's still the community, and I still have that, and I still know that, but there's just a certain level. Like, I still remember one of the nurses that was at the hospital when Emily was born. She's like, I never saw my husband cry, because they lost a child too. And like, literally, he went out to his car, he did what he needed to do, and then came back in, and she never saw him crying. Never really talked about it either. And so for me, I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to go that far. Yes, I will have my moments where it's just got to be me, but I won't let Chris not know that I'm struggling here.
Right.
So I was going to speak to that. It has been hard especially in the beginning, I understand why a lot of men, and Seth included, as he just explained, kind of grieve on their own. But for us, as the women who are openly feeling all of this, because I feel like, one, we have a little bit more permission societally to do so, but two, it just, because we were the ones that carried the child, it just is harder to have that type of grief, like it's just bigger and more overt. Like it's just out there. And so it gives the perception when we're not seeing our husbands openly grieve as openly as we are, it gives the perception that either we're not moving on fast enough, or that they've moved on already, or that they're not feeling it, and that we're really alone in this, and that we're the ones lagging behind because we're not where they are, So that's something that we've had to navigate a little bit, and we've talked lots of times about it. And so, I was able to recognize, like, okay, yes, he's still feeling this, and it's okay that I'm just feeling it differently, right. So we're in a good space with that. But I think a lot of couples probably struggle with that feeling of, because men and women grieve so differently, it can be isolating if there's not an open conversation about what that's like and what each other is feeling,
Well, and that, I'll let me just expound on that. So, totally true. So, like we had a friend of ours who also had a trisomy 18 baby, and she lived to be just shy of 3 years old. And I remember going over to, and I think Henry was not even 6 weeks old at the time, so he was still very much an infant.
And Henry's the baby that
yeah,
you had.
Yes. Henry's our rainbow.
Okay.
Henry's our rainbow baby, who's every bit different than Emily in every way.
I'm pretty sure she sent him pre-programmed.
Right.
She sat him down before he came and said, "Now listen, this is what I need you to do for me."
Yes, and he had
Go be all the things I couldn't be for mom and dad instantly.
Right. Which is crazy. But so we went over to her house, and she got the snuggle baby and the Henry, and I remember she was talking about her husband and how it's like he's moved on, and it's like almost like he doesn't care. He's not really grieving about this and everything. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, well, maybe he hasn't moved on, and you just don't see that because we're hiding. And I wanted to say something, but I just couldn't. It was like, well, do you find yourself alone in your bed at midnight? Do you think maybe he's in the bathroom or somewhere else and you don't know where he is? Maybe that's when he's doing that. Maybe that's when he is processing his grief. And I think that's the hard part, is that there's an expectation that the mother will get to grieve, the father takes care of everything.
Right.
Everything. So if mom can't do it, then dad's going to clean the dishes, make the dinner, get things organized, get kids to school, everything, and go to work to make sure that mom has her space to grieve.
Right.
And where does dad fit in all of that?
And that's like, okay, so I've just done 16 hours worth of work. I did my 8 hours, and then I did 4 on either side in the morning and in the evening, and now it's time for me to have my time, which usually is middle of the night.
Right.
And so it's, I think, and that perception of, oh, he's moved on. I don't think he's moved on. He's just not moved on. He's not, in many ways, he's farther behind in his grief than the mom is.
Yeah, because he is doing what good men do,
right,
which is to take care of the people they love.
Right. And so that grief process is probably wherever they are, wherever he is versus wherever she is, it's a completely different space.
I really, really appreciate you talking about this, Seth, because one thing I've been very aware of is how neglected men can be in their grieving process. Chris had a lot of support, which you, of course, should have had. And you've even been interviewed by other people. There's a beautiful YouTube video, that is so touching about how your faith has helped you through this process. But it's interesting that Seth is missing from the video, right? And that was something I think is extremely important to emphasize, that whenever there is a loss, there is a man or a boy or a son or a father or a brother that is also experiencing that loss. So Seth, you had a practice time with your friend who lost the child with trisomy where you didn't say anything about the husband. If you found yourself in that situation again, or if you knew of a man who was grieving, what would you do differently?
Well, and had I had the chance to, with our friends, to do it again, I would have, I think I would have been more open and been like, hey, how do you know he's not, how do you know he's moved on? Like, do you really think he's moved on? And I think the hard part is that Chris and I have always been open about what we're feeling, how we're feeling, why we're feeling it. And the relationship has been built on communication. And I don't know that every relationship that's out there where it involves a man is going to always be built on that relationship of communication. So I think sometimes it's, and I think it's hard for me because there's the bro society, like, hey man, I hear you. And so sometimes you gotta break down that barrier and be like, hey, I see you, I hear you, I know that you're going through a loss. I know you don't want to talk about it. I know that you don't feel comfortable talking about it with me. And maybe you feel more comfortable talking about it with your wife, but she's not there. So, like, not there, like, means that she's not.
She's also grieving.
Yes, she's also grieving. And so she's not going to be able to help you other than you two grieve together. And so sometimes I think it's just a simple acknowledgement of knowing of, hey, you're a guy, I know you're feeling this, I understand, I see you, and I hear you. If you ever want to talk, let's do it. And it's funny because, like, we, through Chris and Dari Blake have a...
birth and bereavement doula.
Yeah, and so a couple reached out to us, and they had a daughter that had trisomy 13, which is even less survivable than 18. And, I reached out and I said, hey, if you ever do want to talk, we met for breakfast, and the offers was out. I haven't heard from him. And there's been no, well, hey, my husband wants to talk to your husband about this. And so there's, how he's doing, I have no idea. And so I know that the Chris and her will talk every so often, but you get to the guys and it's like, is he talking to somebody else? Maybe he's got a minister or a pastor or somebody who he's talking to, or a close friend or family member. But for the most part, we don't know, So.
All right. This has been really, really good. I really appreciate everything that you guys have shared. Is there anything else that you feel like maybe has been left out or overlooked?
Well, I would say it's just, if you know someone who's grieving, or that someone's going to go through the grief process, sometimes finding words to say is going to be really difficult. I know for me that's the case, because I'm not eloquent with my words, especially when I'm talking to somebody on a more personal level. But if you know that they're going through the process, and that they're they've got a loss or there's, something happening and they're going to be grieving, it's like, hey, if you need to talk, I'm here. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes just knowing that is enough. Mm-hmm. Just knowing that there's people that are willing to listen if I do need to reach out, but I don't need to reach out right now. But there's just that knowing that community is around you, because you do feel pretty isolated. You do feel pretty alone. And like Chris, and like we alluded to, the world moves on without you, whether you want to or not, whether that's something you really, it's like, oh, hey, well, the sunset, the sunrise 5 times, and you all are going back to your normal lives, and I'm stuck with this new normal. And so there's just, I think, the acknowledgement that, hey, we see that you're grieving, we hear that you're grieving. If you ever need to talk, let us know. And I think women are better at that than guys are. And that's an unfortunate thing. And so if you, but the biggest thing for me as a guy is you don't have to be another male to tell me that. Another female can tell me. A female can tell you that. A friend, a close family friend. I mean, just because you're a female talking to this male, it doesn't make it inappropriate by saying, hey, I see you, I hear you, and I understand that you're grieving.
Right.
I think 2 things. First of all, one thing that I wish I would have realized before I ever experienced grief. I think the first time I really, really felt grief was when my dad died. That was in 2012. I was in college at the time. No, I guess I had graduated by then. Anyway, that was my first really big experience with grief. And, I was taking psychology classes, and you learn about the stages of grief, right? And a stage kind of makes you think it's this linear process, right? Like you go through this, and then you feel 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 this, and then it's done, right? Like there's a process. Well, guess what, people? Grief is not linear. Right. And, I sort of learned that when my dad died, with just kind of how messy and chaotic grief can be, and that you feel all the different stages at once, or, different ones at different times. And so I sort of learned that lesson then, but I really, really learned it with Emily and was like, okay, yeah. And I think it helped me knowing the stages, 1, that they weren't linear, but 2, what they were. I think it kind of helped me to recognize, okay, this is the stage that I'm feeling this, and that's the stage that this is. Just to at least name it, it helped me to kind of quantify what I was feeling and put it into words by giving it a name, and recognizing what stage that could be. Oh, I'm feeling denial right now, or, oh, I am totally bargaining, whatever feeling I was feeling, it helped to name it. And then the other thing is, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I think a lot of times people are afraid to say the wrong thing, and so they just say nothing. Right. And while it's painful when people do say the wrong thing, there's still a little bit of comfort that comes just from the fact that they at least tried. Because at least for me, in my experience anyway, it felt worse when people just said nothing, It felt super isolating.
Or they avoided you.
Yes, yeah, they avoided me. Or let's say it was a baby shower and they didn't invite me because they were afraid of hurting my feelings, or that I would be too triggered, right?
That you couldn't have joy for someone else.
Yeah, or if my friend, one of my best friends was having a really rough time and she didn't come to me like she normally would have before this. And I remember distinctly writing a Facebook post and just explaining, when people don't treat me the way that they would have treated me prior to this, it makes me feel broken. There's something inherently wrong with me now that makes me not able to do the things that I used to do. And I said, specifically about the baby shower invite, invite me anyway, and then let me make the decision about how I feel. If I choose not to, then fine, that's my choice. But don't take the power away from me because it's just another loss. And don't not come to me with your problems because you're afraid that I'm too burdened. Now, granted, if it was like the day after, then sure, right? But, like this happened, a few weeks later. And, don't not come to me just because you're afraid that your thing seems trivial. Like, I still love you and I still care about you and I'm still capable of showing empathy for another person just because this sucky thing happened to me, that feels like another loss. I've lost that relationship, that normalcy, and I need normalcy. And so I think just for people in general, like if you're afraid to say anything, like you don't know what to say and you're afraid to say the wrong thing, just say exactly what Seth said. Like, I see you, I'm here for you. I love you, I care about you. Any of those are always going to be fine no matter what. Anything that's going to be validating, right? Like that was I think one of the biggest things I learned that was most helpful in this whole process is anytime somebody said something that validated what I was feeling, that made it okay for me to feel what I was feeling. So, I always said, since this is a faith podcast, I'll go here. I always use the term faith-splaining when people would try to explain away my grief with faith-based principles. Like, well, you're going to see them again. Or, isn't it great that families are forever? Or things like that. Yes, I know and believe all of those truths, and I believe them even more so now to my core. But in this moment, when I am feeling this horrible, terrible grief, saying those things minimizes these big feelings that are very human and normal feelings that I am feeling, and it makes me feel like I'm not allowed to have them because I'm lacking in faith. Like somehow if I just had more faith, then I wouldn't feel grief, right? And I think, I've always known the story of Lazarus, like I learned that in primary or whatever, grow up knowing that story. And I think after losing Emily, it really, really resonated with me, that story, because even Christ, who knew that he was just about to bring Lazarus back to life, he still grieved. He still cried. He was there for his friends who were also grieving and sad. And I really had to come to terms with okay, people are saying these things from they're trying to bring me comfort, right? And they're trying to make me feel better, but really it's the opposite. It's making me feel worse, but really just trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and recognize that they were not trying to say it to hurt my feelings, but then internalize what I believe and still allow myself to feel the feelings that are human, because that's why we were sent to this earth, to experience human feelings. And grief and all of the feelings that go with it are very much a human experience. And learning to navigate that in a healthful and faith-promoting way is possible with the right help.
Thank you. I really appreciate that comment a lot. As a matter of fact, the podcast is Good Grief. There's oil in my lamp. And a huge emphasis of this is to bring out into the open those beliefs or practices or drops of oil that you collected before this even happened, that you can recognize helped you to grieve well. And I would be interested to know, what are those drops of oil that you believe actually prepared you or helped you to experience this?
I know what was during the experience that helped me get through. I would say that, I think while my mom and dad are maybe not the best examples of people who process grief because of the mentality that they have, just knowing that they went through relatively the same experience is, I think, a comfort. So I think for us, or at least for me, being very prayerful about the situation, about finding out, oh, hey, we see something's wrong. It's just a fluke sometimes, but we got to test this more. And then those tests turn into this test, and then it turns into we have to now do an amnio to find out for sure. But everything that we're seeing is pointing towards this diagnosis. And so just being an open in your thoughts and your prayers, and understanding that what happens here is not necessarily something that a deity, God, made happen. This wasn't, I struggle with people who feel like it's all for a purpose. Everything you have is a purpose. It's like, well, yes, we're here for a purpose, but I'm not so certain that God wanted us to feel these level of pain. But he knew that we would. He knew that this was going to happen to somebody. And so those individuals are going to know this pain at a higher level. Sure. But it's just that making sure that for me, it was just being open and honest, being prayerful. And then, what got me through the whole thing was just knowing that families are forever. And we played that song a lot. We sang that song a lot. And, there are a lot of verses and scriptures that, we relied on, and hymns at church that, there would be a line in there and that it would strike both Chris and I, and we would talk about it later that Sunday, and like, oh, I really felt something during this line. And it was like, and I still remember there was a song, a hymn, and I'm blanking on the name of the hymn, but I think it's I Believe in Christ. And one of the lines is so come what may. Mm-hmm. And it's like, all right, we're going to bring on whatever happens, whatever Christ or whatever this life tells us, we're going to bring it on. And so I think a lot of that is for me, it was just being, those things prepared me. But then I think for me, just knowing that families are forever, that's what got me through to now. Because I mean, I'll be honest, there was a time when I was just like, I don't know if I can handle this. I don't know if this is, and I don't know if this part of my life, which has been a big chunk of my life, I served a mission for this church. Is this really it? Is this, and so having that, well, yeah, families are forever. This is the only place that talked about that. So this is, yeah. And so that was what kept my testimony in of the faith. But then all the stuff kind of rebuilds back up, and we come back out feeling better.
Yeah, the understanding of that doctrine was directly helping you.
Yeah. Well, it's the reality. It makes more real. And like I said, I don't remember Jewish or being born. I don't remember any of that. I think I was, a year and a half old. I don't know. I don't remember any of that. I was there, but, so now I know why my parents feel so strongly about that gospel, about that element.
Right. Yeah.
I think for me, I really like that analogy of oil in my lamp, right? Like, because it really is. It's little drops. It's not just something you can pour in last minute right before something bad happens, or in the moment that something bad happens. There's got to be oil in the lamp already, And I think, just a lifetime of scriptures and moments prior to this, that I felt like I had a pretty good foundation in the gospel and in my testimony and, principles. And then this was an opportunity to really test that out and be like, okay, is this really strong enough? Do I really believe these things, or did I just previously only think I knew them, or I hoped I knew them, or whatever? Like, this was really kind of the refining moment of, okay, here's what I said I believe. Now it's time to put it into practice.
Yeah.
And I think also during the experience, so I think of drops of oil as like things that you do to put stuff in, right? Reading your scripture, saying your prayers, going to the temple, all of when I was teaching ceremony, we called them the SMAs, the standard Mormon answers, right? The things that primary kids would say whenever you ask them, like say your prayers, read your scriptures, go to church, blah, blah, blah. But there's a reason that those are the standard Mormon answers, right? Because those are the things that are going to give you the strongest foundation to get through crap like this, right? But then I experienced a different phenomenon during all of this, tender mercies. And I felt like those are times that other people added oil to my lamp, right? And not in the sense of I'm totally unprepared, like the parable of the 10 virgins, right? Where they're like, please, please give me some oil. I wasn't prepared, right? It was less about that and more about I just needed some extra drops. And in those moments, others were able to give me a little refill, whether that was a text or a phone call or a card in the mail or someone showing up on my doorstep with flowers, or to this day, people still randomly show up. Just a few weeks ago, it wasn't even like around one of the Emily holidays or anything, just a totally random day. A friend that I don't talk to all too often, but she was super huge during the whole Emily time frame, showed up with this little butterfly charm that she had gotten while she was on vacation because she saw it in the gift shop and thought, oh my gosh, that reminds me of Emily. Chris needs to have it. And just showed up on my doorstep with this, right? And so times like that where people feel inspired to do something and then do it, follow through, fills my lamp, right?
I love that. I had not thought about it from that perspective, but you are right. And that seems like the kind of oil that doesn't deplete someone else. You share it and you still, it increases the oil you have because you shared it.
Yeah.
That is different than the personal preparation that fills your lamp. But I love that. I'm going to be thinking about that.
I would almost say that it's not you share that oil gets shared, but then, like you said, it's a thing where they don't lose any, because their act of service, their time actually recharged them.
Right.
Maybe even more so than what you got out of it.
Right. And that brings us right back around again to the reality that grief, in order to grieve well, must be shared. It is a community. It is a communal experience.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I think coming out of this situation, because it's interesting because there was a time when it was just like, bam, Emily passed away in 2019. And so we even said in foreshadowing, we really hope that next year is a better year. But what happened in 2020? Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so
Don't even get me started.
there's this level of, it just seemed like it just didn't stop. Like bad news every time we got up, and it was just like, seriously, what the heck? Like we can't catch a break. This happens and this happens, and
we had all these plans for the 1-year anniversary of her birth and her death, and COVID shut all of that down. We were going to go to the hospital and put up we got her at Sacred Heart. They have a fish bridge and a butterfly bridge, and we bought her a fish and a butterfly as a memorial, and we were able to put up her butterfly for her birthday because it was March, right at the beginning of March, and we snuck right in before everything just exploded, and then her fish we only just this year got to finally put up.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, but going back that, I think that we mourn with those who mourn had never been truer during that process and during the grieving thing. And so as I have grown from it, it's that's a tangible thing that you do mourn with those. I to this day, when I hear something happen to somebody, I feel bad. I feel sad for them. And I may never get the chance to say anything to that individual, but in my head and my heart, it's like, or somebody talked about, I lost my child. And it's like, I hear you. Mm-hmm. But half the time I don't say anything to them because it's like a Facebook post. And so I'm like, well, hopefully they know that I'm thinking about them because I hear them and I see them and I understand that grief.
And maybe that's something for people who are grieving to know that there are silent partners.
Yeah. Well, and I still remember there was a member of our congregation at the time who had a trisomy 13 baby, and she talked to us. I still remember walking down the hall, and I think this was after Emily had passed away, and I didn't get anything from her except for a head nod, just an acknowledgement. We locked eyes for a second, head nod, and then she kept walking. And I would say the same thing that happened like at the memorial service for our friend's trisomy 18 baby. You know, like when we were going through the kind of the makeshift reception line, you know, I acknowledged, you know, her husband, and we gave each other a hug, and it was just this same plane. We get it. No words need to be said.
Right. That's a very profound experience. Yeah. Well, my last question for you. What do you think it means to grieve well?
I think it means, and this is from the male perspective, it means just to grieve. Allow the feelings to go, and allow yourself to, if you need to cry, cry. If you need to do that by yourself, then by all means, but don't choke it back. Don't hide it. You know, I think there's a power to acknowledging that grief. And then I would also say allow others to allow you to grieve. And I think men in general are too proud of that, you know, and it's like, no, I'll go mow my lawn. No, we're going to mow your lawn. Go do something else. Go do something else that you need to do for your family. We'll take care of this. And so I think there's just that allowing yourself to grieve and allowing others to help you with that grieving process.
Thank you.
I think, especially in the church, there's kind of a stigma that you pick yourself up by your bootstraps. You know, the pioneers did it. Why can't you? You know, just kind of that pick up and move on kind of mentality. And I feel like that's not healthy. And I've tried really hard to challenge that in my own experience, both just personally, but also, like I said, we've been very vocal about our experience and about our grief. And I think, like Seth said, grieving well is grieving, like actually doing the work. You know, it's hard, it's vulnerable, it's sucky, there's a lot of feelings, but it's more healthy than just shoving it down and trying to move on, because it will come back. It's not something that you can just ignore and avoid. And, you know, it's not like a scrape that if you just don't look at it, it'll just eventually heal. Like, no, it will fester and get infected and be way worse, and amputation, and you know what I mean? Like, it's not something that you can ignore. It has to be felt. That's the only way through it.
That's the only way you're going to heal.
Infinitely easier, as you said, to do it with others.
Yeah.
Like, it just, I don't know how people do it on their own. I don't think it's possible.
At least not to do it well.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chris and Seth and Sydney. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.